Hey everyone, what up? Matt Kaiser here, and welcome to the final part of this marathon I'm partaking in called Road to Visions of Mana, where I'll play and review the past mainline Mana games in preparation for Visions of Mana, starting off with Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, Trials of Mana Original, and ending off with the Trials of Mana Remake. What the hell is the Dawn of Mana? Now, picture this. The year is 2020, the next generation of consoles has dropped, and we had things like a brand new mainline Crash game in over a decade, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 has been remastered and onto the Nintendo Switch, and we even have say a sequel to one of the best narrative games of all time. That totally did not cause discontention with the fanbase. But outside of that, or maybe even the fact that we also had a brand new IP from The Witcher 3 that totally did not have a crash at launch, we also had things like, say, a pandemic, which a lot of us had to unfortunately stay indoors for a while. But to combat this issue, Square Enix would release a remake of a beloved 90s classic, which would involve 3D graphics, full voice acting, and as well as having a brand new expanded combat system, as well as even some new content to that game. And that game was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Oh, and I also guessed Trials of Mana Remake as well. All jokes aside though, Trials of Mana Remake was a welcome addition for sure. Now development wise, believe it or not, the plans for it was actually back around 2017, which was back when the Secret of Mana remake was still in production. In attempts to finally bring Trials of Mana to the West after some really heavy fan demand, they also took the feedback and reception of the Secret of Mana remake. And mind you, that reception was not well received. And they felt like making it into akin to what a new game would be like, as back then Trials of Mana, as you can tell from my previous video, had no prior localization. This remake was developed by Zine, a company that also worked with Square Enix in the past, with one of them being development partners for Final Fantasy XV, and has recently been working on the Romance and Saga 2 remake, and also even worked with Sega and Atlus when doing Persona 3 Reload. The remake was unveiled in 2019, and then released for around April 24th, 2020 for PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and PC via Steam. As well as also being 14 days after the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, you may be wondering on why the hell I'm reviewing this remake, since I did play the original game. Well, it's mainly due to the fact that Trials of Mana Remake arguably brought new life to the Mana series, reviving it in a sense, on top of the whole Collection of Mana thing. And itself gained very positive reviews from critics and fans. And at the time of this video, it had sold over 1 million copies ever since back in 2021. And it's because of this success we were able to get a brand new Mana game in the form of Visions of Mana. Not only that, but while it is considered to be a hit, I also feel like it's a little bit underappreciated nowadays, especially when it was in the presence of Final Fantasy VII Remake, due to some aspects we'll be talking about later or not. However, what if I told you that this game is way better than you think it is? But before we begin, if you like what you're seeing here, then by all means, like the video, click the subscribe button if you're new, and hit the notification icon if you want more RPG content from yours truly. Not only that, but I'm currently playing in the middle of Persona 5 Royal, and hopefully before this year ends, I'll be able to do my long-awaited 750 sub special of Persona 5 Royal, so please do look forward to that as you can. With that said, let's get back to the video, and without further ado, let's squeak while we're dodging, talk to a little girl that talks with a lot of W's, and break some vases as we head straight into Trials of Mana Remake. So with Trials of Mana Remake, it pretty much follows the same flow as it does in the original, where you have actually multiple stories instead of one, from 6 protagonists no less, each of them overlapping to just 3 general stories depending on the pair you'd pick. And in my original review, I already gave a breakdown and chose Kevin, Charlotte and Hawkeye. So for this, I'll cover Angela, Duran and Reese, the 3 people I chose for the remake. So, for Angela's case, she's a mage from Altena, a kingdom with high-level mages who's being ruled by Angela's mother, the True Queen. Later, she, as well as a mysterious Crimson Wizard, decide they plan to invade the entire world to obtain the Mana Stones and release their energy, but by doing so, they'll have to sacrifice Angela. Angela herself is not fond of this, and decides to flee from her home. She then encounters Fairy, who mentioned in the original, she comes from the Mana Sanctuary itself, and decides to team up alongside Angela to find the elementals to not only restore the Mana Sword, but also to prevent the Mana Tree from dying, and magic in general from disappearing. Along the way, they also meet Reese, a princess from the Laurent Kingdom, as well as an Amazon warrior, where the story involves her kingdom being brought by destruction by the Naval forces, led by an evil woman named Belladonna, who steals her brother. And then lastly you meet Duran, a warrior knight from the kingdom of Valsena, who had his kingdom under attack by that same mysterious Crimson Wizard, and vows to have vengeance. So, together, they journey to the world to obtain the 8 elementals, restore the Mana Sword, and defeat the forces evil that will doom harm to the world. And that is the story. And just like the original, it's not particularly groundbreaking in a sense, and it's more of a simple adventure. But, just like the original, it's still an amazing adventure regardless, and it's more centered on the characters and their motivations. Each of the strengths that the original had, like say world building, characters, villains, and motives, are still maintained in the remake. Given that this is more, say, a faithful remake opposed to, say, Final Fantasy VII, whether this game's either a reimagining, a sequel, or whatever the hell it is. But regardless, a simple adventure for this game is still pretty okay in my book. The characters being Angela, Reese, and Duran are still pretty awesome, with Angela herself in general being my favorite character in the entire game, as she's clearly the sassiest character out of everyone, dropping them cold burns. Get it? Cause she's an ice mage and she can use, ice magic and what stuff and...
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
Whatever. And really, she doesn't really give a crap even. But later down the line she does develop and become more respectful and friendly. The same can be said for Reese, who's more noble and, well, honorable, but she tends to have a playful side to her. And Duran? He's just a nice goofball. Another addition to the remake is full-on voice acting. And while the writing is solid, as for the voices, they are hit or miss. Yeah, one aspect that the game is notorious for that people like to dog on is that the English performances aren't necessarily great, as they tend to either sound either weird, phoned in, wooden, or just completely off. And in some cases, I do agree on that scent for a lot of the characters. This may be due to just bad voice direction, as there's some really good voice talent in this game that just undermines just what could be potentially solid performances. But, at the same time, there's some charm with just, having subpar voice acting. Almost akin to like say a bad 60s Godzilla dub. Hell, even Charlotte, who's arguably one of the worst voice characters in the entire game, manages to fit in the valley of so bad it's good performances, akin to like say Tommy Wiseau in The Room.
Did not hit her. It's not true. It's bull. I did not hit her. I did not.
Then again, after experiencing Limo from Star Ocean 4 and Kamoana from Tales of Berseria, my perception of bad voice acting has altered very drastically. Oh boy. Though that being said, there are some pretty solid performances, ones that being, ones that have just, actual good voice talent. People like Sarah Miller-Cruz, who you may know as Lumine from Genshin Impact, voices Angela to a T. Then you have Brittany Cox, who you may know as Ingrid from Fire Emblem Three Houses, or even Judith from Chills for Daybreak, does an exceptional job as Reese. Then you also have Stephanie Panciello, and she obviously is famed for, Resident Evil as Claire, and she voices the fairy. And then you also have Alejandro Saab, who you may know as Akihiko from Persona 3 Reload, voicing Hawkeye. And as for the villains themselves, they're pretty solid, mainly around with the Crimson Wizard and the Dark Shine Knight, who just like the other villains, are enjoyable foils for the party. Especially the Crimson Wizard, who is clearly a love-to-hate kind of villain. So yeah, just like the original, while it is a simple story on that front, it's still what makes the original game and this one still enjoyable to that regard. When it comes to the visuals, especially for the remake, this game really looks good. Where the original looked really good for a Super Famicom, especially for a 2D game, the remake takes it a step further and brings the world into a new life, especially with the whole being, full 3D, where characters got much more upgraded models and the color palette, especially recreated in the original Secret of Mana, is being used effectively in this game's general art style, using Unreal Engine 4 to great effect. All the environments, characters and locations look really good, so Zine really did a good job with this remake visually. Now granted, since this is a budget remake, there are the occasional odd moments where characters will stand still and talk very stiffly, and it happens a lot. And the mocapping in general is just, it's a little off for my taste. Now I played this game on a Nintendo Switch, and despite some low textures, the game still looks really good, and performance wise it's mostly a solid 30 FPS, till you get to some really heavy battles with tons of enemies and you have to spam lots of class strikes that do tear down the frame rate just a little bit. But that's not much of an issue really, and another impressive thing about this is that load times are impressively fast for a Switch game. And yeah, this game immediately looks way better than the Secret of Mana remake, that's for sure. So yeah, while this game obviously looks amazing, Visions, however, takes that one step even further. Now, we get on to the meat of the game. So Trials of Mana Remake, just like the original, is a real-time action RPG, but the combat is more upgraded here over the original, to fit into more modern standards in a sense, but still retains the core elements of what made the original game, as well as the Mana series, still iconic and great. Now you have a normal attack for a small combo, but you also have a charge heavy attack, almost akin to Secret of Mana, but you can hold it down to do whatever for one big attack, which is especially helpful against enemies that would do a shield buff that can be broken by those attacks. As for the class strikes, they got overhauled a bit, where you get them by collecting these blue shards from taking down enemies and collecting them nearby, or even finding blue jars that can refill them even. And again, these class strikes act as your first super move, and hell, you even get one immediately whoever the character you play as. And it's almost like an ability straight out of, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake in a sense. You also have the ability to dodge enemy attacks, and can jump to mow down aerial enemies, though for a short bit. Though as we know, Visions of Mana will take that step even further by introducing full-on aerial combat. The ring menu is also present, and it's a very smooth iteration, and you're able to cycle between using items or even spells and abilities, as well as also even adding shortcuts for both items and abilities, which makes it easier to access and use depending on the situation. There's also a new thing called the Battle's bonus effects, where after a battle ends, you get rewarded bonus EXP as well as bonus money for doing different objectives, ranging from defeating enemies in either 30 seconds or less, killing them with class strike, or taking no damage, which really gives it a good incentive to strike and plan ahead, especially when the battles get some really good stuff in the mix. The level progression in this game has been altered from the original, where instead of leveling up where you have to get an additional training point thing that will immediately tell you to choose, in here you get training points that are progressed almost similar to like say a skill tree, and you can able to choose how many you want to stack up depending on what you have, whether it's strength, intelligence, magic, wisdom, the good stuff all around. And it gives you lots of abilities like brand new abilities for your moves, or even just bonus effects all around, which is really cool and a good way to experiment all around. The class system is also present like it is before, but you're given an indication of when you can exactly change into them, whether it's a light or dark class, and depending on what you get, you also get improved stats, new abilities, and more class strikes. The seed system, as well as the day and night cycle from what I can tell, remains the same. And in terms of exploration, for a 3D remake no less, it has some neat sections, even points where it would switch to 2D for a nice effect. Though for what the exploration is, it's pretty solid. Even though it leans a little bit more on the linear side of things, the level design is still good enough when exploring for goodies like items, chests, and potentially even Shinki's little cousin here, the little cactus from Legend of Mana, where if you find him multiple times you get a lot of good rewards. And the dungeons itself as well as the levels have been completely overhauled by adding new gimmicks, like slippery sand or even lavas in the fire dungeons. The Vuskav and Flami return, but controlled just as well, even faster than the original. Another new overhaul would have to be the enemies and bosses, where in the last game they would pause the flow of battle by using the special attacks or magic. Here in this remake, they'll give you red markers where their attacks will land, giving you ample time to avoid them quickly as possible. And as for the boss's special attacks, they provide this purple breakable meter, akin to like say an MMO boss, where if you break them just in time, you're able to negate their special attacks, and they become vulnerable for a little time. All of these bosses are a huge upgrade, and make some really great fights. My favorites would have to be Ludka, the Water Benevodon, as well as the Fire Benevodon, and the endgame bosses themselves. Though some bosses really piss me off to no end. Looking at you, door boss, and you, machine golems. Overall, this combat is really good, and it's a good idea of having a more modern mana battle system, which Visions actually reiterates, and actually improves upon. Wait, what's that? A mainline title reiterating upon a battle system from a remake, and it's a series that was originally based on a Final Fantasy spin-off? Well, Final Fantasy, you better take notes on that. I mean, I'm just saying. That being said, there are a few gripes I do have, one of which is the hit detection, where sometimes when you hit some enemies, it does feel a little bit off-putting, as they kinda just stand around and only a few times they do get staggered really, so that's a little bit of an issue. Another issue I just already mentioned is that while some bosses are amazing, some of them are not. Door boss. Machine golems. And then we have another issue, and that would have to be the party AI. At best, it's fairly decent, but at worst, oh my god, can they be just so stupid at times. And they really screw me over, especially during the bosses. But even when I do modify the settings, they tend to dodge attacks sometimes, but other times, they just stand around and get killed. And even when trying to take down bosses' special moves, they don't use their class strikes, even though you can clearly see they have enough CP to use it for. And honestly, it's just really annoying. Another nitpick I would have to say is that, well, there's no co-op, which is a shame for a remake like this. But outside of all those flaws I just mentioned, the combat itself is still amazing. When it comes to the music, it absolutely slaps, just like the original did, with the tracks being arranged by Tsuyoshi Sekito, Koichi Yamaoka, Ryo Yamazaki, and Sachiko Miyano. I hope I didn't butcher those names. With the original composer, Hiroki Kikuta, serving as the supervisor. And one thing I really like about the soundtrack is how close these tracks are to the original, but more updated, which is a nice touch. That being said, I do think that there are some tracks that are even better than the original OST, especially one of the battle themes, which absolutely goes hard. And like a lot of remakes, you have the option to switch between the remake OST and the original OST, which is awesome. With that said, let's do a showcase of these updated tracks, and I'll be playing the ones that I used in my original review. Lastly, we get on to the content. Now, outside of the whole multiple routes and the little cactus edition, what's new in the remake is a brand new post-game dungeon, with having both a super boss and secret boss in the mix. The super boss in question is one that you see in the original game, however the new secret boss, is one that fans of either Heroes of Mana or Dawn of Mana, if there are any are familiar with. You also get things like a brand new additional class, as well as New Game Plus, that will allow you to carry over your levels, money, chain abilities, little cactus sightings and rewards, as well as map information and your equipment. However, that being said, your characters, if you choose to reuse them or rather than having a new one, will reset back to their original class, which is a bit of a shame. A general playthrough of this game can take you about practically 20 hours average, which again is a pretty good breeze, especially for a game like this. With that said, how is this game? Does this remake stack up to the original? Well, the answer obviously is yes. Now, as much as I really like the original a lot, this remake absolutely takes the aspects that I really liked and amped it up even further to the point I really love it. It just looks, plays, and sounds better, and even adds new stuff that the original never had, but still remains faithful to the source material in general. It fits well for modern standards and still maintains that very classic Mana feel, and it's just a joy to play. Now, honestly, I do feel like this game deserves more appreciation. Now, yes, you can knock on lots of things. The voice acting is entirely great. Yes, you can also tell that the game itself is basically a budget remake, with some really awkward stuff like stiff movements and mocap. And yes, this remake does not push the boundaries like something like, say, the Final Fantasy VII Remake does. even though there's debate whether or not this is, well, that's still a remake or a sequel. And I mean, yes, the story itself may not be thought-provoking, but who cares? What I really love about this game, and what I think it does really well, is show that it's not afraid to be, well, a video game. You can tell that a lot of passion and effort went to this remake, and it just feels charming to play. Even has some moments that remind me of even Dragon Quest 11, which is a positive. And especially in an age where a lot of games try so hard to push for graphics, have huge emphasis on cutscenes, and whatever trends that the game is like, or even pretend to like, to the point that they come across as either just playable movies disguised as games. Not helped by the fact that lots of big games just take way too long to make, gets priced a lot, and has to sell lots of ridiculous copies to break even. And even if that game does well, lots of staff just gets laid off. And this shows that a game like this shows that video games can play like, well, actual video games. Damn, I've become a little bit preachy here. I better be careful, otherwise I'm gonna be cancelled or could be considered, well, too woke. Anyway, this game is amazing, and I really prefer it over the original game. However, I still think the original game is still not to be slept upon. But alas, it's still a solid entry point to the Mana series, and one I recommend, especially to those who are new to the JRPG genre. Alas, I'll give Trials of Mana Remake 4.5 little cactuses out of 5. And thus, the review marathon is done. Let me know down in the comments if you guys played this game and if you preferred it to the original. Alas, there's only one game left, and it's the one that influenced this whole marathon to begin with. It's the one that all my past playthroughs of these Mana games has led me up to. And next time, we'll be going to a brand new Mana game in 15 years. So tune in as we'll head straight into Visions of Mana. That said, until then, Mad Kaiser out.